This meeting is being recorded.
Oh my Lord. Hi everybody. Welcome to the now I guess it's quarterly presentation that we do here at Urban Apothecary in Batavia. Shout out to Cheryl Cryer for hosting us every time we're out here. We're not putting her on the spot this time, but maybe a little bit later we can. And we are really, really excited for this one. I'm gonna not ramble here. I'm gonna let Bruce do the intro, but I will just do a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording this, so if you know somebody who can't be here tonight, you want to share with, this will hopefully be up on the YouTube by tomorrow afternoon or so. If you're here in person, the restrooms are that way, but you probably have been made aware of that. And then, yeah, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Bruce Seawick, who's going to introduce tonight's very, very special guest. Bruce, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Okay, and before that, I'd like to acknowledge a couple people in the audience. Annette from, we want to say the Kane County ROSC. Okay, and then my colleagues are part of the original founders of C3, John and Eva, and their delightful son, John Connor. Um, anyway, a little bit about Dr. Roberts. Tom Roberts is professor emeritus at Northern Illinois University and a former visiting scientist at Johns Hopkins University. He is a leading voice in psychedelic studies and consciousness research, known for bridging psychology, education, spirituality, and cultural analysis. Dr. Roberts is the author of Psychedelic Horizons and co-editor of Psychedelic Medicine, and has presented internationally on psychedelics, consciousness, and related sciences. His work advocates for legal, multidisciplinary, and educational approaches to psychedelics. He introduced influential concepts including multi-state theory, the single-state fallacy, mind apps, and the entheogen reformation. Dr. Roberts is a founding member of MAPS, a co-founder of the Council on Spiritual Practices and the International Transpersonal Association, and initiated the now global celebration of Bicycle Day, which is April 19th, which is more than just riding a bicycle. Google that. His lifelong work continues to shape how psychedelics are understood as tools for learning, ethics, and human development. And on a personal note, Dr. Roberts is my psychedelic academic mentor. I started out as a guest speaker in his honors class on psychedelics at Northern Illinois University, and he encouraged me to start a similar class at COD and provided me with the materials, in those days with VCR tapes, that he used in his class to get me started. And thanks to Dr. Roberts, I have been teaching this class for 23 years, and my next class at COD is totally online and starts toward the end of March. So with that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Roberts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. As you can see from this notice, anybody is welcome to copy this and reuse it. This also will be available online in a day or two, or maybe a little longer. And you're welcome to, if you use it, you can use it non-commercially, and please attribute it to me. Can we move to the next slide, please? When I think about psychedelics, I think about the ideas that they generate. And rather than pay attention to what usually goes on, for example, when most people think about psychedelics, they think of either the biology and how that's being characterized by a lot of very good biological researchers, or most prominently, they think about psychotherapy. And that's where the area is really growing very fast now. Most people here probably are in the psychotherapeutic angle. And those are getting known. And the entheogenic or spiritual religious use of psychedelics is getting known and is growing quite a bit. So far this year, as short as it is, and last year and the year before, there's been an enormous amount of growth in the entheogenic or religious psychedelic use of psychedelics. So this evening, I want to look at the use of psychedelics and think of them as psychedelics are entheogens. That is, they generate ideas. And I'm interested in the ideas angles of psychedelics, and I'll be particularly looking at these three items. Experimental humanities, yes, experimental. Inventing mind-body complexes. I look at that as mind and body as one combined things That's why there's no hyphen in the middle of mind and body, rather than two separate things that are related to each other, mind hyphen body. I see it as one thing, and something called mind-based singularity. And I think this is a very speculative possibility about what may be coming on in the future. Have the next slide, please. This is a big outline of what we'll be looking at tonight. And I look at psychedelic renaissance as coming in 4 different stages or sequences. Down at the bottom, what most people think about, which is biology and the neurosciences and psychotherapy. That's where psychedelics are mostly developed now. And we know most of the articles we see have to do either with their biology or their psychotherapy or some combination of those. And I'll make the point a little later on that evolves into the next stage of the psychedelic and entheogenic use of psychedelics. And as we start to dig into that, we'll find that evolves very naturally as a sequence of ideas into the social sciences, humanities, and paradigms. That's where I'll be spending a great deal of the talk tonight. And then that will eventually move us into what I consider the most strange, exciting area of psychedelics, which is developing new ways of designing the mind, of actually designing the mind we make as a piece of architecture, but of course is biological social architecture. Can we see the next slide? Okay, well, we'll be at stage 1 now. I'm talking a bit about biology and psychotherapy. I'm going to give them very short shrift. Whatever shrift is, I'm giving it, okay? They're good. There's the one for biology. This is the picture of the connections within the brain under 2 different situations. Now, when I looked at this, I made the mistake, and I find almost everybody did. Wow, look at a large number of connections under psilocybin. Wow, that's fantastic. Well, it's approximately the same number. I'll point out this later on. What happens is that all the connections that are on the left-hand side, the placebo side, get spread around to the other connections. For example, up there around 10 or 11 o'clock, there's a little blue area. And with it, you can see parts of the blue area are heavily connected within itself, one end of the blue area to the other. Whereas when we go over to psilocybin, the connections in the blue area are spread out all over the brain. So this is my short tipping the hat to the biological area. And now if we move over to the psychotherapeutic area, this is a picture of the psychotherapy room at Johns Hopkins, where most of the research has been done. It's not made to seem like a laboratory, but a nice, comfortable sort of living room where the volunteers can come in and lie down and relax and feel very much at home so that they can talk to the 2 people who are guiding them. And the standard way of using psychotherapy now is not in sort of a lab clinical sort of place, which reminds me, the first time psychedelics was used by Dr. Katz in Chicago, he was in a hospital and he gave it to patients who were in bed, and he had a crash tray so the patients could see what would happen if something terrible happened. Fortunately, nothing did happen. Actually, much to his surprise, he made a discovery is that patients who could produce their own ways of producing of taking their own medical for PRN pain, found that after psychedelics they needed less of their own pain meditation, which is a very surprising experience. So let's go on to the next slide now. Okay, and we're talking about the transition here from the biological therapeutic side up into the next level, the entheogen level. On the right-hand side there is the title of that article that Johns Hopkins printed in 2008. And this was the article that really broke the ground and made it possible for other places to do it. Because if Johns Hopkins perhaps the top place of looking at psychoactive substances, was able to do research on it and publish in the journal Psychopharmacology, that other places figure they can do it. Something I wonder about here is, this is in the journal Psychopharmacology, a very biological, medical sort of journal. And I wonder what happened when the reviewers ran across an article and they saw mystical type experiences and spiritual significance. What is that doing in psychopharmacology? But they fortunately were good enough to push this article in there. They must have thought, well, this doesn't really belong in here, but we'll put it on there, and they're well known. But that's the article that broke open the idea of the link between plain psychotherapy, psychotherapeutic uses, and the religious spiritual uses. And over on the right side is a graph from that study, and it's the number of the volunteers. By the way, I really like Johns Hopkins calling them volunteers, not subjects or just S's. I mean, the volunteer makes it more of a person. And this looks at the effects on their judgment of a mystical experience, and they had a little scale of that. With psilocybin 2 months later and 14 months later. And this is the number of items on that scale that they reported as positive to, very much like my experience. Next slide, please. This talks about the surprise. Of the people who were in this study, 33% said it was the single most spiritually significant experiences of his or her life. Now, these were ordinary people. Not only were they ordinary, they were chosen to be normal. And usually people in their age, which was mid-40s, don't have this type of experience and talk about it in terms of religious things. Now, an additional 38%, bringing us up into 70%, rated as being among the 5 most spiritually significant experiences. So this opened the door to the second stage. And can we move up to the next slide now? So we're moving down here from the first level, follow the blue arrow, up to the entheogen stage. And this is the religion and spiritual development stage. Quite a bit is going on this. Up to about 4 or 5 years ago, there was very little. And now things are beginning to happen to look at these various religious and spiritual uses. And we'll take a look at some of these. Again, I'm going to go through this a little more slowly than the medicines level, but at the same time, we'll take a look at some of the things going on. Okay, let's move on. Okay, what is an entheogen? Entheogen does have a definition. This is for the Oxford English Dictionary in September 2007, the release of new words. So this made entheogen a, quote, legitimate word because it was in the OED, so it must be a serious word. And basically, it's a chemical substance used usually from a plant origin that is ingested to produce ordinary states that the people interpret as religious or spiritual. Next slide. This is a way I see Western religion developing into a new period from the Reformation having to do with the printed text to Reformation having to do with spiritual experiences. And I'm saying around 1500, basically, before Gutenberg got the printing Bible going, most religion was sacred rites, activities, or people who would observe the activities that priests were doing. And then with Gutenberg, we move to the middle slide, we have sacred texts, and reading and interpreting text became the central part of religion. We're still there, and I propose that we're moving from the sacred text and the sacred rites period. Now, we still have sacred rites, and we still will have sacred text, but they will be supplemented to by sacred experiences, called primary religious experiences, the type of experiences that people had in the Johns Hopkins experiments. Let's go on to the next slide. This is a quick overview of how I see this development going from the middle column of our current religion to adding another column. That's Gutenberg at the top there, and that's Gordon Wasson, who did a lot of the original research and got psychedelics well known. And the icon, of course, is the Bible, and then I'm using a nice colorful mushroom there. It could very well be a picture of a chemical. Now, what we are now have done since around the year 1500s, is the printed word has become democratized. And what psychedelics can do is democratize primary religious experience. So this added a democratic shift to religion. And the route to spiritual knowledge basically is reading, study, and thought. That is, people will want to go back to the written texts to justify their positions. And I wanted to add to that mystical experience of interpreting the text and relying on one's own mystical experience rather than reading about saints or other people's religious experiences. So spiritual knowledge transfers from belief, dogma, doctrine, creed, ideology. Those are all words, right? If we ask somebody to talk about their religion now, we don't expect them to talk so much about the rituals they went through of the early period, but they'll say, I believe this, I think this is my text. These are all words. Our religion now is a word-oriented religion. Again, ask somebody about the religion and you get a response about what they think, their ideas, what they read. Whereas as we moved into a theism reformation, they can add mystical experience to that. And so the main academic disciplines are now theology and philosophy. And I think we would have to move biology and psychology into that. I would say philosophy can bridge those, or should bridge them. And ethical action becomes the personal do's and don't, the Eclogue and other things from the Hebrew and Christian Bible. And now there becomes a sense of beyond one's self-interest, caring what I do affects other people. And then education now is reading and discussing the sacred texts. And I hope religious education will transfer now into experiencing transcendence. Again, adding to the previous two columns, not substituting for them. Next slide. There are two major divinity schools or religious schools that are operating now on the Entheogen area. Let's just say they are exploring them. Harvard Divinity School has lots of materials. They've been doing this for several years now. If you go to their site and look under psychedelic, you'll see all kinds of possible collections. They've had good videotapes now for quite a while. They have classes there, both people in the school and in the area, and things they make available. They have a large number of articles that are written, and they also have joined with a part of the humanities and the law school, so that the three of them together put out a newsletter that keeps them up to date on what's going on in all of them. A very good way to keep track of what's going on at the cutting edge. Emory University, historically Emory has been a Methodist university, has started a collection of articles and research studies with their Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality that combines both psychotherapy and philosophy. Two good places. I really recommend checking on those. Next slide, please. Okay, here are two active groups. On the upper left-hand corner, the United Church of Christ, historically known as the Congregational Church, has a number of sections called conferences. And the Central Pacific Conference has passed a resolution recommending that the rest of the conferences, the clergy, and the congregants become familiar with psychedelics in both their psychotherapeutic and their spiritual direction. Shefa, as the name sees, is a Jewish group looking at the possibilities of enriching Judaism through psychedelic experiences. Ligare, a Christian group, has the same activity. And Shakruna is more, I would say, more or less an anthropology of religion group. They have a lot of material, and the area of anthropology is probably the area that I know is out there about psychedelics and probably know the very least. And this is a very good entrance into the anthropology of psychedelics, both current and historical. Next slide. Well, these are various good readings. I won't take too long in each of these. The Immortality Key looks at the use of psychoactive substances in the ancient Mideast and connects it by association to Christianity, but without a clear link there. Psychedelics and Spirituality is a book I edited. This is actually its third title. The Chicago Theological Seminary and the Council on Spiritual Practices had a conference in 1995. We asked people to write about their conferences afterwards, and this is the collection. Sacred Knowledge by Bill Richards. If I have a question about psychedelics and the religious use, I would take Bill Richards' recommendation above anyone else. Cleansing the Doors of Perception by Houston Smith. He had written a lot of different articles on the use of psychedelics, and I collected them for a class I had at Northern, and he wanted to revise them, and it's turned it in this book. So it's nice to know that Houston Smith, the very highly respected philosopher of education, now has a book on psychedelics. His book on world religions, now called The Faith Traditions, has a very long appendix where he talks about the use of psychedelics in a religious way. Psychedelics and Christian Faith is out just about half a year now, and it's the title exactly what it says it does. It looks at psychedelics from a Christian perspective and asks lots of questions that one would ask about this. Are they legitimate? What do you do? If you're a clergyman, what do you do if one of your congregants comes to you and wants to talk to you about his or her psychedelic experiences? And there are lots of books coming on very regularly. This is one of the ways I'm sort of impressed with what's going on in the field. There's a number of new books that have to do with the entheogenic use of psychedelics. Next slide. Okay. Now, when we start studying the entheogenic use of psychedelics, we were looking at meaning and spirituality or sacredness. Now, if we start digging into any of those things, we find immediately that the field expands. So meaning, spirituality, and sacredness expand our interest to look at all these other topics. And these are what I call the rocks and rivers, or the geography of the humanities. So from the second level of entheogens, all these other questions come up. For example, reality. What is the nature of reality comes up? And people who've done psychedelics have probably had this experience. This is real. This is really real. This is realer than real. So what are we going to do with that? Or this, I know this is the truth. Beauty, like anything can feel beauty. For example, I spent some time looking at the knuckle on my thumb once and was amazed by how beautiful it was, just astounding. So obviously, my knuckle wasn't different. What's different was going on in my head. And I think people who are approaching beauty are approaching it from the wrong perspective. They're saying, what is it about this music that's psychedelic? Why is this poster psychedelic? Why is this acting psychedelic? They're looking at the object of act. They're looking at their object of perceiving and saying that the psychedelics resides in that. I think it's the other. I think the psychedelic resides in the mind of the person, because anything can be psychedelic. So it's a psychedelic is a process, going in a mental process that we apply to whatever we have to pay attention to. And if you haven't tried this, try getting into the spice cabinet sometime, and you will be amazed at how beautiful spices can be. And these other I, self, love, the values, goodness, are all the problems and all the ideas that come up if we start looking at meaning, spirituality, and sacredness. So let's go on to the next slide. And you can see this moves us then from sacredness and spirituality up into looking at these other, what I consider the rocks and rivers of the humanities. Next slide. And we'll be looking at humanities, but I mean, yes, good. Okay, we're looking now at experimental humanities. This is a speculative area, as most of my talk is tonight, but I think it raises questions that really deserve to be looked at. And I hope we'll be able to interest people in the humanities in psychedelics. It's very easy that people in biology or in the mental health and health fields get interested in psychedelics. But how do we interested those guys in the humanities, literature, history, philosophy, and so forth? So I've come up with something that I think will be a good opening. Next slide. Okay, I want to talk about the idea of ideogens. Just as entheogens are the creation of theological ideas and experiences at the second level, I like to call this the ideogen stage, that it generates ideas. Let me just look at this light by, down in the corner, that's a book that I've written. This is product placement. So I'll see a little product placement every now and then. And I have this line in there. The therapeutic uses of psychedelics are widely known. Their biological functions are increasingly characterized, and their entheogenic uses are becoming recognized. I pointed this out a few minutes ago. But as generators of ideas, ideogens, they're largely known. So I hope the psychedelic community will get interested in psychedelics as ideogens, and people who are primarily interested in ideogens will see, oh, psychedelics have something to contribute to me besides just knowledge of the human nervous system or how to help somebody recover from some problem. Next slide. Okay, I'm using the idea of consilience. Edward O. Wilson, the famous biologist, known as the ant guy because he got interested in biology by studying ants, has written this book called Consilience. I recommend it. Now, what he suggests is that if what we need is some way, a scaffolding of ideas, which will tie these various biological and intellectual fields together. So there's a scaffolding in the middle. And he says the way the scaffold should work is the linking of facts and fact-based theory across disciplines. I've emphasized that across disciplines to create a common groundwork for explanation. Well, we just saw one cross. We looked at entheogens and we saw it interested in this, in reality and truth and value and so forth. So over on the left-hand side are these various levels of scaffolding. So physics eventually evolves into chemistry, and we have physical chemistry, and we have chemistry, biology, and so forth. And each of these runs into and develops the one next to it. Now, what we need then is some way of connecting these things together. It's fairly easy to see we can move from physics to chemistry or biology to psychology. But how about steps that allow us to put an insert down, let's say, at the first level or second level and get inputs from the higher level? Next slide. There we have it. We put in molecules at the biological level or chemical level, and the experience of psychedelics is that what comes out of them are these characteristics that we talked about in the entheogens. What's the nature of reality? what is sacredness, what is beauty, and so forth. So we have a way of experimentally producing experiences that have these humanistic concepts. And of course, they will vary according to the dose, the person's state of mind at the time, and the context the person is in. So these then become experimental variables in looking at the nature of reality. If we increase or decrease the dose, does the nature of reality increase or decrease? Suppose the person is in a place he's never been before. Does that affect the sense of reality? Or suppose the person hears a truth. Does the strength of the dose have to do with what the person thinks, oh, this is maybe true, or this is true, or this absolutely has got to be true, and so forth. So this is a way of approaching humanistic concepts by introducing molecules and doing consilience by putting the molecules in at one level and having the output at the next level. Okay, notice I call this experimental consilience. There we are, the next one. This gives us experimental humanities, trying to get at some of the humanistic ideas. This bridges the famous bridge between the sciences and the humanities that C.P. Snow wrote about in 1954. And that idea is one of the ideas been kicking around the academic world and ever since. He says that the world of ideas divided into the sciences and the humanities, and there the two shall meet. Well, I want to propose psychedelics as one of the bridges that allows us to bridge the sciences and humanities by doing experimental work in the humanities. Next slide. Okay, so all these questions in the humanities and in psychology get re-asked. Our current research looks at all these in our ordinary default mind-body state. But when we get into psychedelic states, all the questions get re-asked. Every one of these, I'm not going to read them all, but just notice on the second column down at the bottom is intelligence. I'll say a little word about that. And the last one over there at the bottom of the third column, etc., is the big one. All the other things that I left out. So we could look at every one of these topics and more and ask, how do they vary in our psychedelic states from our ordinary mind-body state, or ordinary mind-body complex? So this opens a huge area for research, like meaningful openness, altruism, values. We can look at every one of those. And every one of these, of course, is not just one thing. Religion, compassion, memory, this is a whole raft of ideas. It's not just one thing. So each one of these is really like a pie chart with lots of little pie pieces in them. Move on to the next slide. These are some of the reading hints for the humanities. Over there in the upper left-hand corner, the Chemical Muse has a sort of fascinating story behind it. The guy who wrote it was a student in biology, and he got interested in reading ancient texts. And he started reading ancient texts, and he started to bring his biological knowledge into those. And he started to say, a lot of things that ancient Greeks and ancient Romans wrote about have biological stuff. They took all these drugs and they had odd experiences. And he wanted to write his dissertation, or actually his master's thesis, claiming that the ancient Greeks and Romans used psychoactive plants. His advisors were outraged. Of course, the classic pure Romans and academics of the ancient years would never have used psychoactive substances, and they refused to accept his master's thesis unless he removed all the information. And he saved the information and has this book, The Chemical Muse. Very readable type book. This second book is one by Stan Grof, who uses his idea of the human mind to look at some of the work of DuPage. Well, here's my product placement. And I have a chapter in there, well, a couple chapters on the humanities in there too. And this is Aldous Huxley's Island. Look, I used Doors of Perception in my class, and I highly recommend. I expect some of you have used it, but this is his novel. And Apples of the Apollo is fascinating. It's written by Carl Ruck and two other writers, and they're looking at the use of psychoactive plants in the ancient Near East, basically along the Mediterranean, and has a lot of very strong information on it. And I hesitate to suggest this. I suggest you read the footnotes. He keeps on filling in information with wonderful observations of the ancient world. Now, he calls it Apples of Apollo. It's not just about Christianity, but it's about ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, and also further back. Hi, Tom. Tom Riedlinger, there's your article. Has this great article, An Interpretation of Sartre's Rite of Passage, showing that using Groff's view of the human mind, that Sartre's ideas may very well have been strongly influenced by a psychedelic experience that he had. And finally, this article by Stan Groff, Perennial Roots of Wars, Totalitarian Revolutions, Groff uses his map of the human mind to point out that leaders have often got their followers, their countries, to go to war using birth imagery. If you want to have some fun with contemporary politics, take a look at what's going on in America today and look at it in terms of Groff's imagery. Groff's major book, original book, was called Realms of the Human Unconscious. It's republished now as LSD, Doorways to the Numinous. It's very readable. And as far as I know, he has the largest sample of human experience put into that book. And I really recommend it strongly. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, here is a look coming from Huxley Doors of Perception. I just want to read this one line. This is an experience of inestimable value to everyone, and especially to the intellectual. So there's a nice intellectual, if you want to say, need a quote to support it. Next slide. So I think we add to liberal education at this point. A traditional definition is the one on the red box there, to free students from the ideas, attitudes, and habitats of their particular times, places, and societies. I think that's a nice way to look at education. And I'm suggesting we expand it into a mind-body complex, which we free students from the processes, intellectual emotions, and sense of self of the default mind-body complex. In other words, education includes experience of and ideas about all the different mind-body states that we can produce with psychedelics. Now on to the next slide. This is the big question. What we've been talking about so far has been psychedelics. Now, suppose instead of seeing psychedelics as a field, we see it as one member of a much larger field. Besides psychedelics, are there other ways, I call them mind apps, we'll talk about that in a minute, to restructure our brain-mind complexes. And this opens the gate to what I consider the biggest intellectual possibility, and probably also psychotherapeutic possibility. So let's go on to the next slide. And we're talking about mind apps. This has to do with designing new brain-mind complexes. Again, I'm taking the brain-mind as one word, not as two separate things. And so we move now from experimental humanities into an area called inventing mind-body complexes. Next slide. And we're moving from the ideagen stage, the third level here, now up to the mind app, the mind design stage. Okay, so let's see what we got there. What is a mind app? I'm defining them as, well, as an analogy here first. Mind apps are to electronic devices, or rather digital apps are to electronic devices, as mind apps are to mind-body complexes. And just as when we install digital apps, we can do things with our brains and do them more powerfully. When we install mind apps into our mind-body complexes, we can do things with our mind-body complexes that haven't been done before and increase their power. Next one. Okay, here's another way of looking at a mind app. It is an object or experience that changes the brain's connectome. Next slide. Remember we saw this earlier. This is an example of one, okay? Here are the connectome, the connections within the brain have been changed. And I want to make that note at the bottom and point that out again. It's so easy a mistake to think, oh, there are more connections on the right than on the left. There aren't more connections. The new connections that are there are connected differently. Now, of course, if we're going to connect parts of the brain differently, we would expect the brain to be able to produce new things they wouldn't have done otherwise. I think that an example of this may be Kerry Mullis's invention of the PCR technique. He got a Nobel Prize for it. A problem with in biology and the biological sciences, and even in law, has been sometimes there are samples from an experiment or a crime scene that are so small they can't do and analyze them. So he developed this PRR technique to take a sample and multiply it so you can examine it. And this has made all kinds of biology and also investigations possible. Now, what he did describe this as, he said he could sit down there and imagine in his mind going through this biological process. He could visualize it. And I think a real advantage of psychedelics to people who are word-oriented is to be able to include a visualization ability in this. And if we consider that our brains have both left and right hemispheres with right, especially strong in visualization, I suspect for a lot of people who are word-oriented and theory-oriented and word-oriented, it can help them just develop the visual. Temple Grandin, of course, comes to mind in this. Next slide. Okay, I'm not going to read this. This is a chapter from Mind Apps, and it lists all the a whole bunch of mind apps that I've got there. But they're not just biological things, but they're experiential things like breathing techniques, yoga, and meditation. All the things that are coming along now in the geological and genetic area, maybe ways. All these things that are being developed now in the understanding the nervous system give us an opportunity not just to understand the nervous system and maybe develop new psychotherapies from them, but also see them as part of our understanding of the human mind. So to understand the human mind, we want to see it not just in a psychedelic sense, but in the sense of all these other possibilities, these other mind apps. So here is just sort of kind of a pie-shaped view of that. To understand the human mind, we should see it as a collection of families of mind apps. And of course, every one of these gets divided down into lots of little sub-pieces of pie. And I've just listed some common ones here that we generally think about, but there are also lots more in that list that we saw. Now, if you look over on the left side, it says multi-state theory, a full view of the human mind. This is to get the idea that our minds are a collection. Now, we just jump to the next slide. It says cut ingredients. Instead of thinking of them as just description of the human mind, what happens if we think of them as ingredients, and we can have recipes of using these to put them in our human mind. So every one of these little pieces of pie here and all of its little sub pieces can then become recipes we can combine together to produce in different mind-body states that have never been produced before. And I think this is probably the biggest possibility we've got in terms of the world of ideas. is we can develop new mind-body complexes or states of consciousness, as we might call them, and we can invent them and see what's there. And a good analogy here is to think of the periodic table. You know, at the beginning of every chemistry class, there's a big periodic table on the front, and it's how, the whole thing is about how you can put these together in different combinations. I suggest we think of mind apps as being like the periodic table we can put together in the various combinations. And a lot are just going to be curiosities and probably worthless, and some are going to be downright dangerous. Isn't something you want to jump into. But at any state, it's possible to think of these all as ingredients. And of course, it's not just what the ingredients are. We can go to the next slide. Okay, I think this is the biggest intellectual project that's available. The fullest development of the human mind. We're developing our minds in every mind-body state or every mind-body complex that's possible, and see which ones are useful and which ones are just curious and which ones aren't. So again, let's look at this, the line there. You see somebody taking magnetic stimulation of the brain. There are all kinds of brain research that's going on now. It's just astounding, and finding out ways of investigating the human brain and influencing it down to not just the subcellular level, but the subneuronal level. Now, every one of these is done largely for medical psychotherapeutic reasons. But that also means every time we develop a new technique for observing the mind or measuring what the mind is doing or influence the mind, every one of those has the potential of becoming an ingredient. So new ingredients are, thanks to our biological people, are being developed all the time. And the question is, what can we do with them? And of course, what happens when we add them to some other ingredient? So here we have magnetic stimulation of the brain added to unknown chemical over here, results in what? And not only would there be those two, but there would be the different combinations of them. Different chemicals, different strengths of chemicals, different parts of the brain activated, different amounts of stimulation. There also is light stimulation, the magnetic stimulation. So all these can put together with an enormous number of experiments and ways of developing the human mind. And so down at the bottom, just imagine this. Take any mind app, add it to another mind app, and add it to another mind app, and result in what? We don't know. So these are these problems coming back again. And we ask this question to every time we looked at psychedelics. But now we ask every one of these questions at every recipe that we develop. In other words, there's enough here to keep people going on for more than generations of research on this. And of course, we will discover new types of mind apps as we go along. Okay, so here we're getting back to liberal education. And again, to develop the human mind fully, people should know about, and in some cases, and we don't know yet which cases are appropriate and which are inappropriate, to free students from the cognitive processes, intellectual emotions, and sense of self in their default mind-body state. So look, the word is intellect in there. The intellect then, our ways of thinking, our usual ways of thinking, can be looked at in every one of those mind-body recipes. So the possibility of developing the human intellect is, I'm tempted to say it's infinite. It's probably very large would be a more accurate way of saying it. Okay, next one.
Hey, Tom, just a heads up, just to give you a heads up on time. We're about 10 minutes till 8 our time. So I want to make sure. Yeah, I want to make sure I get people time for questions too. So whenever you want to do that, happy to take that either online or here in person. So I'll let you take back over. I'll mute myself again.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. I think will be it. Okay, next slide. The question then is a singularity. Singularity is the idea that was developed for technology that eventually technology will be developed so far advanced it will surpass humans in their in our intellectual capacity. And I'm suggesting a mind-body singularity, that these various recipes can make us surpass our own current way of thinking, and we can have not only technological singularity, but a brain-mind singularity. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Thank you. This gives us a chance to what's called the hard problem. The hard problem is the question of how does the brain produce the mind? And we get every time we have a different mind-body complex, we'll have a different sample that we can draw from. And we're going to now approach that problem, not just in our ordinary state, but any other state. Okay, so here's the end now. We move from medicines through religious experiences, who've taken up to the humanities, and takes us up to the idea of mind design. Thanks. I'd like to hear questions, comments.
Yeah, if anybody here in person has questions, I'll stop sharing here just in a minute so we can get everybody on screen. So if you're here and you got a question, we got the second mic that's going around. Or if you're online, you can just like raise your digital hand or come off mute, and we will do our best to try to accommodate everybody. So everyone give it a round of applause for Tom just to start.
Thank you.
So is there anybody here in person that wants to ask a question? I'm gonna briefly stop this share so I can kind of get us back on screen here. There we go. Now we can see everybody. Any questions online too? You can, like we said, come off mute or raise your hand. Otherwise, I know Bruce has probably got some questions he could talk to his mentor about too. But yeah, we'll leave it open for folks. We do. We have a person. We have a microphone assistant. Just make sure it's switched on.
I apologize if this question is like you should have paid attention in my presentation because I went over it already. If it is, I apologize. But I noticed talking about brain mind as one word and mind body combined. Can you help me understand how they're different or the
Yes.
same?
Yes. These are little editorial changes I've made for brain, mind, or mind, body. When I want to consider two things that are very closely related to each other but not the same, like the mind in one hand and the body in the other, I put the hyphen in there to show that they're different. When I want to consider them as just one unit, then I leave the hyphen out. It's just a little editorial thing, but it helps me be clear of when I'm thinking of two related things or just as one clump.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Say, Tom, I was going to ask kind of maybe it's a corny question, the stoned ape hypothesis and the evolution of the brain. I was wondering if for those of you that don't know what that's about, it's a theory that I think it was Terence McKenna proposed, that at some point our brain exploded, not literally, and attributed to the use of mushrooms. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Until about 5 days ago, I was very skeptical. I ran across an article by Michael Winkelmann and others who notes that his idea is not that that our ancient ancestors, our humanoid ancestors, ate mushrooms and therefore their brains expanded, but that by eating mushrooms, they were able to develop a better social relationships with each other, and it was a social sort of thing, and that also accompanied a larger brain. And I wouldn't have thought much about it, but if Michael Winkelmann writes about it, I'm taking it seriously. I'm going to be paying some more attention to that now. I just sort of read very quickly through the idea is that physically the brain may have expanded by using mushrooms, or the people whose mushrooms may have actually bred more in right brain. By the way, a very interesting sideline on this As you know, in science fiction shows, they often show people who come from other planets with these big heads. Well, the human head skull is have little pieces with babies, and they hardens later on. Suppose we just delay that hardening so the brain is like a 16th of an inch larger. There would be a lot more neurons in there, or there would be billions of neurons at just a 16th. Suppose a quarter of an inch. Suppose all this the genetic stuff has a possibility. That's one of them. One of them is as designing new neurons and new psychoactive chemicals that affect those neurons. I mean, the geological aspects of this are amazing and frightening at the same time.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? We got just a few minutes left. Actually, I got one just in case I can set us up if there's another one. But for those of us who work, because I think there's quite a few here who work kind of in the health field, whether that's like with substance use or mental health challenge people, what can we do as professionals to kind of like fight the stigma that's still around psychedelics, like specifically in the substance use and mental health field?
Well, one thing is to use those techniques or techniques that'll be helpful to psychedelics. Also, reading classes and teaching classes are very, very useful. This professional organizations also can give talks. I know Bruce has talked at several Illinois groups, and this is the way things spread. Also, just yesterday, the Nora Volkov, who is the director of the NIDA, has published an article suggesting that psychedelics are an area that need approval and research from NIDA and the various national health institutes. And this is like Mrs. Insider saying, "Okay, let's get going on psychedelics." So, and then of course there are groups trying to improve the acceptance of psychedelics within laws. I'm ambivalent about them. I want them to be very carefully controlled use by people who are skilled in doing psychedelics. Another thing, of course, is having psychedelic training for professionals. Like Bruce has the copy course at COD. There are about 20 or 30 now universities that have courses, particularly for psychedelics. And in the nursing field, there are about 50 universities that are working with nurses to teach them how to be psychiatric nurses and to work with psychiatrists and with psychedelics. So the field is growing. I always hope it grows faster, and all those things can be faster. And of course, in Illinois and other states, there are ways of approaching the legislators to get them to encourage them making psychedelics legal. And my concern is that they will move too fast and make them too legal for people who should not be taking them. Because every professional I know, at least the ones I say that I respond, always say psychedelics are not for everyone. And in a, particularly in the mental health field, they should be taken with a mental health professional who has training in the field. Just as their doctoral trainings, there need to be some mental health trainings too.
Okay. I know Tom had his hand up. I want to make sure I get that question, and then maybe we'll have Bruce sign off here. And I meant to say this earlier when I opened up the floor. No sourcing, please, and thank you. And yeah, we'll get Tom in, and then I'll have Bruce wrap us up.
Okay, I have a question and a brief comment. Hi, Tom. Tom, I'm trying to remember when you introduced the idea of mind-body.
You know, I wondered that too. I had a book that came out in 2006, an obscure book called Psychedelic Horizons. I might have mentioned it then. I might have mentioned it in the Psychedelic Future of the Mind. And in my book, of course, Mind apps.
Yeah.
I developed it, but and I probably developed it talking in the lecture first.
Yeah,
So
I seem to remember it goes back into the 90s at some point. But
very likely.
my comment was that I always appreciated it because I have felt for years that one of the neglected areas of research in psychedelics was proprioception. And and one of the things that triggered my interest in that was Houston Smith's famous essay, "Do Drugs Have Religious Import?" And he talks in there, he speculates that psychedelics, connect us to what he called an ecological awareness below the threshold of consciousness that's there, but of which we're normally not conscious. And that seemed to me very much what you're talking about with mind-body states. And I've always hoped, I myself am not a scientific researcher, so I've not had the chance to explore that myself, and I've been uh, somewhat disappointed that there's not been more work on that. But you've kind of pioneered interest in that idea.
Well, I picked it up from other people who've taken that ecological approach. Yeah. No, UCLA has a group that's particularly looking at psychedelics and ecological ideas.
Great. Well, congratulations, Tom. Great work.
Tom Riedlinger is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School and did his work on psychedelics. So he's a real leader in the field. And now Harvard Divinity School finally caught up decades later.
Well, thank you so very much, Tom, for continuing to expand our consciousness and society's consciousness. Announcement to the group, we already lined up our next presentation on April 9th. It'll be Mike and Annie Midhofer, who are in charge of the phase 3 studies for MDMA PTSD research for MAPS. So this will be archived on the DuPage ROSC YouTube channel, and we'll continue to do this until the whole world is enlightened. So everybody have a good night, and thank you again, Tom, and nice to meet you, Tom. I've seen your Tom Redlinger. I've seen your name in many places, and it's good to put a face with that. Thank you so much.